of new international politics of war and mineral recolonization. A few experts said that when people try to predict the future, it can be helpful to look at the past and assess today's trends. This section includes comments about how the past can inform the future. A Spanish philosopher, George Sataya, once said, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." The question remains, can history repeat itself? It is a common phrase used by people. We love to look at our present, compare it to the past, and then focus on all the similarities to say we've seen this before. History always repeats itself. Do Ecowas leaders remember this? Former British Prime Minister Sir Winston Churchill once said, "Development and the purpose of learning history is to prevent making the same mistakes as our ancestors did to prevent history from repeating itself," unquote. While in 1824, German historian Leopold von Ranke wrote in his book, History of Latin and German People, that history is assigned the office of judging the past and instructing the present for the benefit of future ages, unquote. This means that history is to be used as a yardstick to look at the past, which benefits people as a lesson and a references. The history of West Africa has many things to unfold, as long as experiences, the past and the present, repeat itself. The present trend shows that the history of West Africa explains why some 21st century youths who understands the historical facts about Western, when we mean Western, we mean Britain, France, Portugal, Germans, invasion of West Africa as a significant fact to learn to predict the return of neocolonization that is unfolding. The contact of these Western countries between the 15th to 18th century reminded us of the kidnappings, killings, human trafficking in the first stage that ended up in transatlantic slave trade. They staged wars in the land and occupied the rich mineral areas of what is today West Africa. This unhealthy occupation and relationship led to colonization, undevelopment, and the production of leaders who are only Maroons who depended on these very foreign invaders to maintain their positions. Today, Ecowas leaders have exposed their ignorance of history, including the Niger coup negotiators who are parading from Nigeria to Niamey. Why is Africa so important to the West? And why is it particularly the West African countries that today parade themselves as democrats? Have they looked at the history? Have they looked at the past? What comparison have they come out with? There are many issues to settle as long as relationship between the West and the West African countries are concerned. They moved from slave trade era to industrial revolution era, all in West Africa, all in African countries.
Million Africans to their colonies in the Americas. Around 200,000 people never made it. They perished at sea. As the slave trade developed, France needed ports. They got one in 1659 here in Saint Louis in Senegal. For a long time, French interests were limited to coastal Africa. The interiors were untouched. But in the 19th century, that changed. There were two reasons for that. One was the domestic rivalry back home. The European powers were already competing with each other. Africa became a new theatre. And reason number two was resources. Europe needed to feed its expanding industries. They zeroed in on this area. It was called the Gold Coast. There was gold, oil, and much more there. The French expansion began from Senegal. In 1854, General Louis Faidherbe was appointed governor. He quickly got down to business. Under his rule, French control was extended to Gambia. But his ambitions were bigger. He wanted to conquer the Niger Delta and Mali. His government was not so keen, though. They thought it would be too expensive, so the expansion project was paused. It would resume in the 1880s. This was the beginning of the scramble for Africa. No shadow wars anymore. European armies were marching across the continent. They were picking off countries one by one. This inevitably led to fighting between European powers, so the German Chancellor proposed a plan. This man, Otto von Bismarck, he brought all the European countries together in Berlin. In 1885, these countries signed the Berlin Act. It formalized the scramble for Africa, and the logic was quite simple. Instead of fighting each other, let's carve up the continent. Each country gets its own colony. And no, the Africans were not consulted. In the 1880s, almost 80% of the continent was ruled by the locals, kings, sultans, and tribal chiefs. By 1900, it was flipped. Around 90% of Africa was colonized by Europe, and Niger was part of this. In 1899, 2 French officers were put on the job. Captain Paul Vollet would lead this mission, and his second in command was Julien Chanoine.
When this inhuman trade ended in 1807 through the help of British parliamentarian William Wilberforce, they turned to the same West African countries for industrial raw materials. They discovered several raw materials needed for their industrialization in the 19th and 20th century. They abandoned slave trade. As they go about these businesses, they were also peeping other areas of resources within the country where they colonized. Some found mineral deposits, including gold, crude oil, and diamond. They focused on those new products discovered at a later time and took over powers from the owners of the land and became the owners while the real indigenous people struggle to exonerate themselves from their ill-treatment and also denial of the resources from their land. However, Second World War between 1939 to 1945 exposed their inabilities at the battlefield, and the prominent and dedicated sons of Africa utilized that opportunity to demand for the independence and the freedom from the colonialists. The question is, did African leaders or those who fought for independence receive total freedom from the colonial masters? That is what is hanging all French West African countries and the English-speaking countries, colonized by both Britain and France. Today, in this century of technology revolution, armament research and development, financial development strategies and infrastructural development, and emerging challenging power struggle between the Western and the Asian countries, African leaders have continued to play no role except to express and exacerbate their slave-master relationship politics. In what they call democracy today, for you to be friendly to the West, you must be a controllable asset at international level, a toil of continuity of recolonization and development at every level of the country where they rule.
Desire for protection against the risk of coups or threats. However, this quest for security sometimes comes at a cost. Western powers, in exchange for backing, may expect these leaders to prioritize external interests over serving their own people or their nation's best interests. Former French President Jacques Chirac's declaration in March 2008 rings with a sobering truth. France's significance could diminish to that of a third-tier power without Africa. Chirac's predecessor, François Mitterrand, foresaw this perspective as far back as 1957 when he
United Nations gave every group the right to choose the type of government they want, and as a result, the Western countries decided to choose democracy as their own way of political leadership. The Arabs used the Emirate system, while the African countries are being compelled to use democracy as the West want them to use it. However, there is nothing bad about the democracy, but it depends on the process for which it is practiced and controlled by those who introduce it to African countries, especially West Africa.
However, this quest for security sometimes comes at a cost. Western powers, in exchange for backing, may expect these leaders to prioritize external interests over serving their own people or their nation's best interests. Former French President Jacques Chirac's declaration in March 2008 rings with a sobering truth. France's significance could diminish to that of a third-tier power without Africa.
The question is the democracy properly being practiced as is supposed to be, especially comparing the democracy in Western world and those of African countries? Democracy in African countries, especially in West Africa, is just a mere name for which a group of people are being selected by the same powers that gave them the democracy to use those leaders to amass the wealth of those countries concerned. Today, many West African countries, especially those in French-speaking countries, have realized the exploitation that has taken place for over 400 years and have decided to change the system. But unfortunately, the Ecowas leaders have exposed their ignorance of history. Why are there coups in West African countries? It is widely known that in Europe there were a lot of coups, and they sat down to find a lasting solution to these problems. But in West Africa, there is no solution to that. Today, they are speaking about the coups in French-speaking countries of West Africa. These ECOWAS leaders have heard about their complaints. They've heard what the people are saying. They know the level of development and the mineral resources these countries have. There are no infrastructures, no good roads, no hospitals, no employment. And these complaints, they have led before ECOWAS. Why has ECOWAS failed to establish a common ECOWAS currency? Why has ECOWAS not summoned French president, finance minister, and industrial or mineral resources minister, or send delegates to negotiate handing over the full management of the Niger Republic mineral resources for them to manage, to set a free choice on how to manage and develop their own country? Instead, ECOWAS are sourcing out means to go and fight against the military juntas who took over power. If ECOWAS were to be enlightened, they could have gone to the historical board of, for instance, Sir Winston Churchill of Great Britain, who once said that development and the purpose of learning history is to prevent making the same mistakes our ancestors did, to prevent history from repeating itself. They did not go back to the history. They did not go back to why are these people not being developed.
Nations find themselves compelled to deposit a staggering 50% of their foreign reserves into the French central bank, all under the control of the French Minister of Finance. Astonishingly, as of 2014, Togo and approximately 13 other African countries continue to shoulder the burden of colonial debt payments to France. The repercussions of dissent are grim. leaders who dare to resist face dire consequences, often falling victim to assassination or facing destabilizing coups. In a troubling twist, those who comply with France's demands are rewarded with a luxurious lifestyle, supported by the French government.
If you want to work in a 9-to-5 for the rest of your life, then skip this ad. You need to
They did not go back to history. Who are responsible for the lack of development? What reasons are responsible for lack of development in the oil and uranium-rich country? Instead, they are bidding to the choice of the colonial leaders who want to rage and wage war against those who took over power and complained about lack of development in the country. Had Ecowas been what they claim to be, it is their duty to summon all the representatives of France, representatives of Niger Republic, representatives of all French-speaking countries that are complaining and giving some reason. Then the African Union, including some European Union members and the United Nations, for them to negotiate, to allow the countries to utilize the mineral resources in their country, develop the type of democracy that is suitable to make the development function effectively without interference from any foreign powers. At least, if these were to be taken on board, then the world will know that ECOWAS is bidding for the people and not for democratic exploitation. It is unfortunate, despite all these mineral resources abound in these countries and the daily exploitation, since 1960 they got independence. No African countries can boast of self-financial independence and development. All these are in the name of democracy. Today, all Western countries are advertising for African citizens to come to Western countries for employment, as there are no jobs in their home countries. With this, we come to the end of today's analysis. It is a food for thought for everyone, and we believe those who have confusion on what the ECOWAS is supposed to do, it is being explained what they're supposed to do. They are regional leaders who are supposed to ensure that the development comes to the regions, not to act and fight for democracy that does not yield any dividend to the people or to the masses. Left with all African youths, there is nothing like a democracy, because most of these leaders are bidding for their own private security, enjoyment, and the development of the external colonialists who are putting them into power. How long will this last? Every generation comes and goes, the complaints remain the same. Well, that is what we have for you today. We ask God to bless you all. Do not forget to subscribe, share, and hit the notification bell as to be the first to receive any video we publish. Thank you very much. God bless you all.